Yeah, the question of the right. I mean, you see, the thing is that the right did split in 1970. When did
early 80s?
Early 80s, and look at their leadership. David Owen, Shirley Williams, just ended up, in rather sort of, embarrassing sort of positions in the House of Lords. I mean, they're not they're occasionally wheeled on for kind of comment, on the radio and things, but they're not political forces anymore. I mean, their political careers ended about, I'd say probably 6 months after or a year after the split. So, that it weighs vividly in the minds of any ambitious right-wing politician. They've not got anywhere to go within the existing political system. And so I think this means they will go all out to try and destroy Corbyn. That's why they'll work so effectively, I don't know about effectively, but so concertedly with the media, which is their main weapon, actually. Because, they're not going to have much influence on the unions. They don't have that sort of channel with the unions in a way, because of the way that Blair kind of, dissed the unions when he was in government. That they're not those sort of right-wing channels that they used to be with the unions. So they've not got that option. Constituency parties are more and more moving to the left. So MPs and the media is their main way of attack, and they will use that to the maximum. I think the other factor is the whole kind of issue of the British state. And here, I think Corbyn will have to make a few more leaps. I think the question of Scotland is going to be quite important, because he at the moment is basically pro-union. He's not supporting independence, and while that it might be too much to expect him to sort of move in the direction of independence, I think he's got to make some move on the constitution. He's got to at least come up for a federal Britain or something, because he's never going to otherwise really provide the kind of leadership that could win support in Scotland. Without some support from Scotland, which always used to be a sort of bedrock of the Labour Party, and in a way, the loss of Scotland was really why Ed lost, actually, which wasn't to do with being too left-wing. It was, he completely messed up. He joined in Cameron's attacks on the SNP in a way which just meant nobody in Scotland really would vote Labour. And the SNP completely swept the board electorally. So, but if he tackles the British Constitution and applies his radicalism, his new politics to the British state and the breakup of the old union, and actually follows through the idea of a federal Britain, and then that leads to talk and the possibility of electoral reform, then whole new sets of scenarios unfold, which on the one hand will lead to more animosity from the right and from the city and so on, but on the other hand will maybe lead a section of the right to think, proportional representation. We could have a chance then of a different kind of party. We could form a party which will then be in coalition with the Lib Dems and the Conservatives. So I don't know. So there's a kind of scenario there. I mean, I think the question of an alternative party to the left, I don't think it is the end game. I just don't know. I think at the moment the key thing is to focus on building an effective transformative movement. I mean, anyway, I think the lesson of Syriza and Blocco, and in a way going back to Rifondazione Comunista and the Italian experience, which Syriza kind of partially learnt from, but not sufficiently. They didn't sufficiently learn the importance of this transformative power and transformative capacity, and putting the resources into that rather than just purely into electoral politics. And so unless you get that right, an alternative party of the left really means fuck all. It's not sort of going to change anything really in the end. It's going to be trapped. It's going to be, so I think that debate isn't, it's pretty much over in Britain, and the emphasis is on really trying to think, what do political activists do if they're not going to be vanguards? What is their role, in terms of popular education, resourcing of struggles, connecting of struggles, all the kind of political activities that are actually to do with politicizing mass activity.
Good. Michael.
Two questions. Okay, point well taken. Of course, we're talking about Syriza being in office, not in power. It's my mistake. It's sort of the, sometimes I make that. The question about Israel. The country's foreign policy changed when George Papandreou came into power in 2009. Greece, as we all know, has very, very good relations with the Arab world, and the approach with Israel has to do with the exploitation of the oil around Cyprus, and Greece's commitment to Cyprus, and Cyprus was the first vanguard of reapproach sort of Israel and sort of elevate these relationships at a different level. The interesting thing is that this development hasn't hurt that much, not at all actually, the relations of Greece and of Syriza with either the Palestinians or other progressive Arab countries. I don't know much about that, and there's not much on the press, or it's not a public issue to be debated. Since I'm holding the mic and this is power, has not been in office, I would like to make a point along the lines of opening and closures. Okay, supporters, a new category of vote in new leaders and changing the course of left-wing parties. This is, to me, it is a closure. In this case, it was an opening, but it is a closure. It's a step towards the Americanization of the European parties. Now, because it's happening, and it happened in Greece, it's going to happen with a new election of the right wing. It happened with the rising to power of George Papandreou in PASOK 5-6 years ago, and so on and so forth. This means that the way the party structure operates on the left needs to be completely renovated. This alludes more to the task the radical left parties, the new left parties have to do the work we have to do in a creative way, rather than being for or against of what is happening, which is, open the collectivity to everybody. You know what this means? It's a nice day, you pay €2 and you can vote for the leader of any party you like every time that this happens. This is ridiculous, okay? But it's different. Why this is happening, why this is legitimate to happen, is because the organization of the parties are not at all appealing to the citizens that they wanted to participate into politics. So it's our task, and Syriza made some very interesting steps towards that way. I don't know for how long, and if we are facing with a closure, we'll see. That remains to be seen. But we have to think about a new sort of institutionalizing new and innovating participatory means, instead of going into this populist that doesn't lead us anywhere.
I wanted to maybe push this question one step further. The position of the European left parties has been, including the ones who run under the common banner in the European Parliament, and Tsipras led the ticket last summer, has been that if you have economic and monetary union, then what the left should be calling for is social union, and is fiscal union, and is political union. The effect of that would be to even centralize further Europe and make it leave less space for the balance of forces in any particular country to be registered. On the other hand, if what one should be pushing for is either to do away with the European Union or to somehow decentralize it, then the problem of the refugees becomes all the more aggravated. So I don't know the answer to this, but I wonder whether this is being addressed, discussed. Is it a matter of breaking from the European Union, as I think essentially the left platform would like and is calling for, although it's afraid to say it because it's so unpopular in Greece. Not just to leave the euro, but to leave the European Union. Is that the answer? Is the answer to try to reconstruct in some way, as people were asking, a new political force to centralize Europe further? Are these the kinds of questions the left in Europe needs to address? Why don't we start with you, Caterina?
First, just quickly to Greg. The measure, I think I mentioned it, like the four big measures that Bloc go through to the Socialist Party, which are basically the same that the Communist Party is using as like the basis for any sort of agreement, are to unfreeze the pensions, to stop the flexibilization of the labor market, and so to prevent like easy firing, which is part of the Socialist Party's program, to not lower the taxation for employers and employees. So in Portugal, for each employers have to pay 23% for each contract, and employers have to pay 11% of their wage. And the Socialist Party wants to lower that contribution, which seems like a nice thing at the short moment, but actually not only it means that we're lowering the taxation on capital, which is in itself wrong in principle, but it also means that it will contribute for the complete unsustainability of the social security system that is already almost unsustainable. And the fourth line is it's actually something that the Constitutional Court, which has actually been in Portugal one of the most important actors of the opposition to the austerity measures in the last 4 years, has already decided in favor, which is to give back all the cuts in wages that of the last 4 years in the next year. So these are the four basic things. There's extra things to it, like that are not a question of state budgeting, like same-sex couple adoption, stopping some kind of national exams for second and third graders. So there's a couple of things that are not a question of budgeting, but this could also just pass on Parliament either way, so that's not a direct question for the agreement that we're making. So these are the four lines. What we said is, if the Socialist Party accepts this, then we will allow a government. This doesn't mean, one, that we enter the government. Neither Bloc nor the CP is saying that we want to enter the government. What we're saying is we will allow it on Parliament, we will vote in favor of the state budget, and we will create some measures of protection. For example, a working group on the renegotiation of the debt, which of course the Socialist Party is not accepting, and to kind of protect ourselves from things that can happen if they change what they agree with us. I think the position of the CP is an interesting one, but also what is interesting is I think they are the ones who have less at stake. They are, so the Socialist Party is going through a process, in a smaller and slower scale of PASOKification. So it's losing its base of support, it didn't win the elections again, and so on. and Bloco has a much more volatile electoral and basis of support. The CP exists for 100 years. And they take always between 8 and 11 or 12% in the elections, no matter what is happening. No matter whether there's big movements on the streets or a right-wing government, it doesn't matter. Okay. So they are the ones who have less at stake. So if they mess up, their basis of support is so strong for so many years that they can enter these negotiations without worrying as much as we have to worry, in fact. About the $1 million questions, right? About the European left and all of this. It's hard to answer. I think one thing, I'll try to be quick on this, but I think there's something that is important to be said about the nature of the European crisis and the nature, which is related to the nature of the European Union and the Euro. So the European Union and the Euro, or in particular the Euro, was formed as a transnational bloc, an economical transnational bloc that would be capable of compete with the US, with China, and so on. But it's a transnational bloc that is actually based on the competition between member states, between nation states. So since the beginning, for more than 30 years, what has happened with the periphery countries, so basically the Southern European countries, but not only, but with the Southern European countries very clearly, was to enter the European Union meant, in many cases, and in Portugal this is very clear, and in Greece it also means the same, in a way to destroy our productive sector, to the destruction of our productive sector being compensated by very easy credit, and to create an economy of services and tourism, and at the same time an economy of import that would import the goods that are manufactured and produced in the center of Europe. So the European Union is a core periphery structure from the beginning on. And the Euro, on the contrary of what the narrative was, which was an instrument for equalizing all of this, it's not. It was an instrument to deepen already the inequalities that already existed. For example, when the national currencies, how do you say this? When they converted national currencies into the euro, the German mark was overly devalued in comparison to all the undervalued, devalued, in comparison to all the other national currencies, so that not only they would press and compress the value of labor, the wage value, but also because like this, the products that Germany produces can be exported at much more competitive levels to all other European countries. So there is a core periphery structure to the European Union and to the euro from the beginning on that never had the intention of equalizing anything. So by this, I'm not saying, so this is where the difficult part comes, because some people talk about Euro fetishism or European Union fetishism, but there is a material condition to it. There's a material basis for this to exist. 100% of the money that is used in research and science in Portugal, 100% comes from the European Union. So to break with the European Union and the euro means, for example, we have no more money to budget for research and science, at least right now. So there are very clear, and we are overly dependent. We're a service economy that is overly dependent on the structures of the European Union and the euro. So it's very hard to break with it. That doesn't mean that we don't need to start saying maybe we will need to do it, because we know that breaking with the euro might be bad in the beginning, but it might also be the only chance for recovery, while austerity, as we know, is endless, because no matter what happens, that is always growing, growing, and growing. So what is my opinion about this? I think we need to still work within the framework of the European Union, because this is the real framework that we find ourselves in today. But at the same time, we need to start thinking outside of its limits. And so, for example, I think in this case we need to think about campaigns and demands that maybe in other moments we could call them non-reformist reforms, or ideas that, for example, a European-wide minimum wage, a common taxation system, or citizenship to all immigrants, which would solve the question of refugees, for example, opening borders. All these things are, in theory, possible, but in practice impossible because of the structure of the European Union. So it is possible for the left to build European-wide campaigns around these issues, and if we do it well, there is a moment where we will just go against the walls of the European Union that will say, no, this is impossible. And then possibly we would have accumulated forces in order to say, okay, and then if this is not possible, then we need to break with it. But if we build, so it's the campaigns that question the structures of the European Union or the European project in its own foundations that seem possible, but are actually not. I think this is the kind of thinking that we have to have when we're thinking about an European or a pan-European left or at least left campaigns. I don't think we can, I don't think we can give up on the nation state. That's not possible today. Democracy happens at the practice, on the daily lives of people. Democracy is the welfare state, is education, it's our hospitals, and we need to fight for them, and they happen at the level of the nation state. So we still need to fight for them. So we cannot just give up on this, but we need to start to think a bit more on a transnational level. And I think we need to do this within the framework of the European Union, but starting to build ideas to overcome it, just as an idea. Well.
Good.
Okay. About the movements okay, I'll give you a couple of examples and tell you why I said that not all movements are positive. Movements are positive when they put forward and they raise the issues of TTIP, which is comes from Syriza in the last few months. Movements are positive when they raise the question of racism, when they mobilize to bring down the fence, and when they do solidarity work, when they try to build new anti-bureaucratic trade unions, and so on and so forth. And movements are very positive, not when they're associated, affiliated, patronized by by Syriza or for any other party. But movements are very negative and even reactionary when they say, just yesterday, no, Syriza members are not allowed to mobilize against the fence. Movements are reactionary when they say the youth, whatever remain as a youth of Syriza, they cannot participate in the anti-racist festival, a festival that has been organized by Syriza or the Syriza sort of milieu or tradition for over 20 years now. And movements are reactionary when 3 weeks after the Syriza assumed office, Occupy is called break down the infrastructure of the only sort of free and liberal framework within the civil society, and put forward demands such as very radical reforms in the prisons, simply because they want to prove that Syriza, after all, is going to be just like every other reactionary parties. So, and this tradition sort of mixes up, and that happens to Syriza as well. Syriza party and Syriza government, which is a coalition government. About the pan-European, the $1 million, whatever, $1 billion euro question, I would say. The left always had problems to articulate in any concrete fashion how do you go from the class struggle, which happens, and we see it and we participate, we see all its dimensions at the national level, and how this can be seen having an effect at the international level. And it seems to me that the left has also problem to see how some developments in various locales can be taken, can be capitalized by mobilization at the national level and at the international level. Let me give you a few examples. European Left Party. Is it the answer? No, it's not the answer. Is it a small step forward? Yes, it is. Transform. Is it the new think tank about the future revolution? Of course it's not. But are we in any better that we have a seven, I believe, languages, journal and network and all that kind of stuff? Of course it is. Did Tsipras leadership in the European election change Europe? No. Did the ticket of in Italy, the list with Tsipras or something, change anything? A little bit. Got more MPs than before. Tsipras visit. I advise you to find Tsipras visit to the European Parliament and see what it is. You have the whole social democratic bloc split in half. You know, the one part wage a war, the most unfair war against him personally and Syriza, etc., and the other welcome him very much. The Greens, the same thing. So there are dynamics. And when the president of Portugal says what no other European leader, part of the elite, has said, but they have it in mind, that, well, listen, Europe is not about democracy, and Europe does not have the prerequisite of democracy in its as a constituent part. But Europe is going to tell you what democracy is all about. Okay, when it is said, there is reactions, and these reactions, and when we have this, Tsipras delivered a fantastic talk just 2 days ago about the refugees, saying it's not just the babies and the people who die in the Aegean Sea, but it's the values of human traditions of European Union opens the space for another Europe. What Europe? How we can envision it? It's going to be centralized? I don't think so, but we see what is going to happen. I'm just saying what I'm proposing here is the left should not be impatient and try with the eyes and the experience, the static experience of the past to analyze and see where we're going from now on. And let me a minor point of criticism to our comrades in Spain and in Portugal. You said, Caterina, that we're going to support the government if they give us that, but we're not going to be part of the government. Why not? Why the left cannot continue delegating whatever little or greater power has to somebody else? We should assume responsibility. and try to see if our ideas about democratizing the state, democratizing production, changing the world, how creative we can be, instead of staying. This is old politics. This is old politics. This is old politics. This is dimensions of the instrumentalist tradition of our past, and the new movements, even in Greece and elsewhere, and all the traditions that in the last 30 years can be taken advantage and enter power and see what happens. I'm personally, I don't have much time, not to be outside the state and say, well, I'm not quite ready. I mean, this is not Marxist tradition. This is not grabbing the bull from the horns and do something about it, instead of wait until everything will comply to the ideal type, either Weberian or Plato's tradition. We are Marxist, and we Marxists are materialists, and as materialists we're realists. That does not mean that you get into power at all costs, and without conditions. But if you put all these things that you mentioned about the forming a new government, why not assuming a couple of difficult portfolios and make a little bit of difference on something, towards empowering the powerless, towards all these ideas that we've been working among ourselves for decades now.
Good.
Okay.
Can I answer?
Hilary, yes.
Hilary.
Do you want to go ahead, Hilary?
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, so just firstly quickly on the Labour Party your question on the Labour Party. The question of the nature of the Labour Party, is that being now debated? Well, I'd say it's not, it's coming out of practice now. I feel we're embarking on quite a sort of amazing experiment. I think a lot of our old theories have been not exactly disproved, but I mean, I've always, in this book I wrote, Labour, A Tale of Two Parties, I did argue, and also Leo can say, he and Ralph Miliband have argued about the sort of limits of change in the Labour Party. So, without going into detail, but I did argue about the sort of this alliance between the parliamentary party and the trade union leadership being a kind of key force of moderation and a sort of ultimate constraint on change. But what's happened has shaken that. I mean, the new rules, which I agree with Michaelis' kind of ambivalence about this supporter notion, but in the particular conjuncture in Britain in which it was introduced, although it was introduced for quite reactionary, sort of Americanizing, individualizing reasons, but actually it was sort of subverted. But in that context, the old alliance has been, and the old institutions have been significantly weakened. Now, they've got a great capacity to recover, particularly through their power in the parliamentary party and their power in the media. And so in a way, the debate now is much more about, it's almost like a given that level is like a big constraint and problem and maybe, impossible to overcome. But, at the moment, the key debate is about, this movement that's been created outside the party, and as it, signs up for the party and considers whether to become active, what will the local parties be? Will they be a resource for the struggles of the extra parliamentary movements, or will they simply become a site for trying to change the Labour Party in Parliament? And so that's a sort of experiment that's now underway. People are trying some strategies one strategy in some areas, another strategy in another. So that is, let's see, we'll have to report back on that. But certainly out of that will come constant debate. So on Europe, I mean, the sort of forces supporting the exit are predominantly, there's Murdoch, but I don't think they're major forces of capital. I haven't, to be honest, I have to say I haven't really studied this, and I should. But generally, the sort of industrial and financial, I mean, in a way, finance kind of, I'm not sure how important Europe is to the city, because, you know, the city has a mobility anyway, and in a kind of deregulated EU, which, you know, Cameron is going to push. I mean, Cameron's strategy is not exit, it's to use the threat of exit to achieve maximum deregulation, to get rid of anything that's left of the social Europe. You know, there are still significant measures protecting maternity leave, protecting employment rights, protecting, I'm not sure if there's measures protecting pensions, but there still is, you know, as some significant things left of that social Europe, and that sort of environmental regulation still exists. So, you know, he's trying to get rid of all that, you know, so the city is supporting his strategy without supporting exit. So, I mean, I agree very much with Caterina's strategy of sort of, you know, but before I come to that conclusion, just to say that, you know, there has been a history of European collaboration. There was an amazing period in the 90s of the European Social Forum, which, you know, was a sustained movement, pan-European movement that was, you know, immensely energetic, you know, overcoming all the problems of language and travel, and, you know, people, all kinds of, you know, improvised and technically quite proficient or more or less varied forms of translation. You know, whole networks developed of volunteer translators, you know, all kinds of transport, people hitching, walking, hiring buses, and anyway, all this sort of thing developed. You know, so you had huge gatherings in Florence, in Athens, you know, and out of this, I think you had phase one of a European movement, which is people simply getting to know each other, to trust each other, to work together. And out of this has already come a lot of significant networks. I mean, in a way that what there was of solidarity with Syriza was a product of that. And a bit like Michaelis' kind of balance sheet, I'd say, you know, did that lead to, you know, Tsipras and Syriza having a massive, you know, bargaining power coming from the movements in the negotiations? No. But did it lead to initiatives that have led to people really learning from the Greek experience, and that being a kind of transmission belt back to their own countries? I'd say yes, you know, there has been a learning. So the whole issue of the lack of democracy in the EU is going to be a crucial factor in shaping people's policies and strategies towards Europe. And also relationships have developed that now have had an impact. For example, you know, there has been a few reforms of the European Parliament, one being the idea of a citizens' initiative, that if you get 1 million signatures with a proportion in different European countries, you can get a resolution onto the European parliamentary agenda, and it can be passed. And that's led to the campaigns around water privatisation, organising across Europe, you know, building on all the relationships forged during the European Social Forum, which would have a lot of workshops on privatisation and alternatives to privatisation. And that network has mobilised to achieve that very resolution on ending privatisation. So now it's European policy. I think it's even, you know, sort of in the constitution, that water remains a public good. So now also you've got a massive trans-European mobilisation against TTIP, this, you know, massive escalation of deregulation of investment and of the opening of the public sector to marketisation. And that's now, you know, a British movement, a French movement, a Greek movement, you know, with the support of the Tsipras' government. You know, so there are all these networks. Now, I think this lays the basis for the kind of non-reformist demands that Caterina's talking about. And I just take it a little bit further, because I think that, in a way, the development of a movement around those kind of demands, on the whole, it's been movements against, you know, the further liberalisation of Europe. but I think it could also become the basis of positive demands around minimum wage, around corporate taxation, and so on. But I think it could also, as those clash with the reality of the European Union, it could then be really strong demands for the democratization of the European Union, including the decentralization. I mean, an aspect of the networks is that networks between cities, between regions, and also it could lead to a demand for transparency. This comes out of the Greek experience. That all these meetings that determined the destruction of Greek democracy were completely done in secret. Now, you could simply demand that all European meetings, which, because they're all intergovernmental, not actually European, their governments protecting their backs, are completely secret. The meetings of finance officers, finance ministers and so on. There's no minutes taken, no minutes made public. Now you could just have simple demands of a non-reformist, kind that are very credible and realistic and feasible. That all EU meetings of ministers and so on, intergovernmental meetings, be minuted and those minutes be put up on the internet, or they be the live streamed, or there could be this clear sort of demand for transparency, which would get real echoes amongst the kind of movements of today that make issues of transparency and information and communication central. So I think that basis it's not utopian to think there is a basis for a pan-European movement that is focused around specific campaigns. That's where our strength has been, and how that then develops in terms of a systemic alternative, I think, has got to be something done through conscious reflection as we campaign and interconnect around these specific issues.
Good. Caterina wants to come back. I'll let you come back. But that'll be it, Caterina.
So I'll probably help if I take 10 seconds, can I? And I will talk. Because I'm afraid the way I answered the question, the €1 billion question, I could misunderstood. The problem with Syriza, and I'm not apologizing, is that we don't open the debate about Europe. We don't debate. In that sense, we can slide into the fetishism of Europe, that, as Caterina said, and that's lack in Syriza's sort of strategy right now. Hopefully, the government, it's much more difficult to open, but the party can open this question. Okay.
I actually wanted to say something about power and about Europe, or why we don't go into government, and why I think this is correct. And I don't want to throw around like Marxist jargon about Marxist tradition, but I think that Marxism as an instrument also tells us that in order to develop strategies, we need to analyze very seriously the material conditions and the relational forces that we're in. And I think that the concrete conjuncture that we're in is a party, the Socialist Party, that has been the party that has applied over the last 40 years of Portuguese democracy the harshest austerity cuts measures and deregulation of the labor market, except for the last 4 years that the right wing was, the country was under the Troika's hand. It's the party that signed the memorandum, and so it keeps as being the partner of all European institutions and elites, and they are not willing to break with this. And it is a party that at the moment has a schizophrenic relation with politics, that has a serious trouble in defining itself. So we don't want to be the crutches of a dying social democracy. Why should we? That doesn't bring us anything. And I would like just to remind you that the last time that a party that is similar to us, both to Bloc West, to Syriza, tried to do this, which Hilary already mentioned today, which was Rifondazione, entering the Prodi government, we know how it ended. What?
Destroyed itself.
Yeah, it destroyed itself because the relation of forces with which Rifondazione entered the Prodi government is very similar to the one we have today. We're 10%. We cannot influence everything. And as I said before, because the Socialist Party does not want to break with any of its international compromises, what is very possible that will happen is that even if they agree to some of these measures for now, it's very possible that in the next months they will break with them. I mean, this is their history. They promised one thing, then do the other 3 months later. When Brussels says, no, I'm sorry. Now you have to cut here, cut the wages, the deficit's too high, and so on and so forth. So we don't want to be part of this. And another reason, I think, is, which is a very serious and important reason, is that we have no movement on the streets that is able to steer and control and influence to the left any sort of government.
That's more important.
And I think this is a central question, which I think should be the central strategical question for us, is how to rebuild this movement. And I don't think, so I said before, I used this idea before, this idea of like, and much less a labor movement that is open and capable of anything. So we have 1 foot on the parliament, 1 foot on the street, no foot on the shop floor. So we're very weak in terms of social roots and implementation. So we don't have the critical capacity on the streets to even be able to steer a government to the left in case we join and then the Socialist Party forces us to do something else. So, I mean, in terms of relation of forces, I think to enter a government, one thing is to allow a government, but still protect our program, which is a left-wing program. And the program of the Socialist Party is not a left-wing program. It's actually a program that, with 1 or 2 or 3 differences, is the same as the one from the right, with the difference of social questions, with social questions like the abortion law, same-sex marriage and adoption and so on, but this can all be passed on parliament anyway. We don't need to be in government for this. But with this exception, the economical program is basically the same. So I think we need to protect the left and the future of the left by not entering a government where we would have no space of maneuvering for anything. Because we're small.
Okay.
Sorry, too long.
This is a good answer, and maybe the synthesis is that, Michael, you said that from 2012 on, from the time of the electoral breakthrough, Syriza became more and more governmentalist and parliamentarist, even before it was elected, and building the base of the party so that it was able to draw in people from the movements, the solidarity networks, and develop a creativity at the base to, have the capacity to imagine and to implement at a local level different forms of consumption and production, etc. That was not developed. And the greatest danger with Corbyn it's not Corbyn's danger, is that the party at the base will not change. Ed Miliband used to say to me, I'd rather have 300,000 active trade unionists in the Labour Party than 3 million paper members. And I would say to him, but you wouldn't know what to do with 300,000 active trade unionists in the Labour Party. The Labour Party constituencies exist to pass a few resolutions up to the party conference and to select an MP. They don't exist as centers of community life. They don't exist as political organizations. They don't exist in the sense that trade union activists could link up their role as class on the shop floor with their role as class agents in the community. And if the Labour Party can't be changed, and having the debate in terms of will Corbyn get elected in 2020 gets in the way of changing the party at the base. So it's a terrible contradiction, because if you can't promise you'll get elected, people will say, well, what good are you to us? But on the other hand, if that's all you do, then you're leaving the party, which is very weak at the constituency level. Almost, as we know, the NDP is here, for the most part. What are those bodies? So it's a real dilemma, a real strategic dilemma. Anyway, thank you so much, and thank you all for staying.